we're in Matthew 27. I don't know how much we'll get through tonight, so we've paused for a short period of time to go over some of the offerings, or the five offerings back in Leviticus, and how Christ matched those. We get up to verse 51 through 66. Again, the information here, there's a lot of great information, and we'll see how far we get with it. Delilah should be back shortly, but let's read verse 51 through 56, and then we'll get going. So Matthew 27, verse 51, and behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many. Now when the centurion and they that were with him, watching Jesus, saw the earthquake, and those things were done, they feared greatly, saying, Truly this was the Son of God. And many women were there beholding afar off, which followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering unto him, among which was Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James, and Joseph, and the Mary of Zebedee's children. Father, we thank you for the opportunity that we have to study your word, and as we come through the ending of this particular chapter, again, our goal is that we are here to learn more about you and understand your promises and how you keep those promises, and how we, through patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. And we thank you for this day. Thank you for your word, and we thank you most of all for Jesus Christ. And it's in his name we pray. Amen. Now, like I said, there's a lot of stuff that's going on here. There's something very, very interesting that you notice here in verse 51. And it says, And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. There's something very interesting that I wanted to make mention of. When we see this here, that the veil of the temple was rent in twain from top to the bottom, there's a few things in this that we want to make sure that we know and understand. Now, years ago, the very first Bible study that I had, the study Bible that I got way back when, the very first one. Did I put too many words in there? Okay. You look like, are you sure you're okay? Anyway, the very first study Bible that I had, in Ephesians 3 or Ephesians 2, when it talks about the middle wall partition being torn down, its cross-reference was with this passage. And that's probably a high percentage of people, Christianity out there, they probably think that that's what it is, all right? Because they don't understand really Ephesians chapter 2. Hold your place here. Go to Ephesians chapter 2, because I want us to see this. Yes, and it's a common thought, and that's one of the reasons why the study Bible that I had shows that it was, but we didn't know at the time. But in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 13, notice, we talk a lot about these passages anyway, but notice in verse 13 it says, But Jesus, you who sometimes were far off, are made nigh by the blood of Christ, for he is our peace, who hath made both one, and hath broken down the middle wall of partition between us, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for to make in himself of twain one new man, so making peace. Now, when you see this, and you see that the middle wall of partition is broken down in verse 14, and then you get over here to the veil being rent in twain or torn into two different pieces, I could see how somebody that doesn't understand what's going on with Scripture might make that jump in their logic. Well, so what is the wall in Ephesians 2? Huh? No. But what is it that you have over in Ephesians 2? What's the thing? If you look at verse 14, for he is our peace who hath made both one. In the context here, who are the both? Circumcision, uncircumcision, Jew and Gentile, right? So what is it that's made? He takes both of those and makes one. The separation there isn't you and God, right? Because that's what they'll do. The two becoming one is the difference between God and man, and he's taken that away and brought us together. And that's what they're doing with the veil, and that's what allows them to do that, because in the holy place where the Ark of the Covenant and all that stuff was, where the priest would go in and do the things that he did in there, that was for God's presence, right? And we've talked about that and gone through that. So what they do is they'll say, well, this is the veil is torn in two, and what they're doing is they're making the distinction of when the bride of Christ, or the church of Christ, is born, is at that moment, because God takes that difference away. But if you take things in context, the two things that are become one in the context here is uncircumcision and circumcision, right? We know that because that's what the verse says. And so then, verse 15, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for to making himself of twain one new man, so making peace. And so then what you see in Ephesians 2 there is God is taking the separation or the difference between Jew and Gentile, or circumcision and uncircumcision, and he's done away with that difference, right? That's what he's talking about here. That's the thing that separated them. Now, older dispensationalists, what they'll say is that middle wall of partition is the law. And so then the law is done away with. And so then it's the same thing. They'll take that and they'll take it back over to the veil being rent in twain, that God is tearing down the veil, and that's what he's doing, is he's doing away with the law with the death of Christ. Well, there's a bunch of problems with that, because neither one of those things can match, because is there a difference between circumcision and uncircumcision after the resurrection of Christ? Yes. We see that in Acts chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, all the way through 7, right? Now, if we think about that, that doesn't work, because what people do with that. The second thing is the law still there after the resurrection of Christ? Yes. In fact, what is it in Acts chapter 2, what event are they celebrating, if you will, or partaking in, is the Passover, which is a strictly Jewish feast. And part of what they're doing over there, even with Ananias and Sapphira, part of what they're doing over there is they're taking up money, doing all the stuff, and then spreading out the wealth and all that. And even in that part after the resurrection of Christ, you still have the law there. So then neither one of those two things would even fit, because both of those things continue after the veil's rent in twain. So what's interesting here, and this is one of the places that we stand and say, this is what it is. How do we know that the veil, or back up, how do we know that the middle wall partition is not the law? Well, when we see verse 14, for he is our peace who hath made both one, and hath broken down the middle wall partition, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for making himself of twain one new man, so making peace. So he's broken down the middle wall of partition that's between us, and what else has he done? He's done away with the law of the ordinances, right? So those are two different things. So he takes care of one, but then he also takes care of the other one, right?
It can't be the law and the law again.
Yeah, you can't break down the law and then say, okay, well, I've gotten rid of the law, so what do I need to do is get rid of it again. And when is it that we notice that there is no difference between Jew and Gentile, and when law is put away is really with Paul's message, right? Of course, that's the basis of all that. And of course, that's fine. Mm-hmm. That's fine. I know, that's fine. Mm-hmm. Well, there's part of that, but there's other things that we're going to talk about that go along with that. Yeah, but no, that's fine. It's fine. Now, what I want you to also notice is a lot of that is based off of also a misunderstanding of verse 16, because if you look at Ephesians 2:16, it says, and that he might reconcile both. Well, who's the both there in the context is still Jew and Gentile, right? Circumcision and uncircumcision. Unto God in one body. What's that next word? No. By, right? Now, how is it that he's going to reconcile both unto God is by the cross. And a lot of times what people will read that is he does that at the cross. And so then when we're over here at the veil and it's rent in twain, people read this over here in Ephesians 2 and say the middle wall is the veil, and when it was taking place was at the cross. All right. So there's a lot of things in that passage right there that people bring in that they don't need to. Now, well, that's a different thing. We can get into that, but maybe. All right, back in Matthew 27. Did you have a question?
No, I mean,
Oh, okay.
it can be both, but in different ways.
Yeah. So back in Matthew 27, verse 51, it says, and behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. So, if you remember, go back to Psalm 80. Psalm 80. Psalm chapter 80. Neighbors are over there. I did not, no. Oh, you did? Okay. All right. So, Psalm chapter 80, notice here in verse 1, says, give ear, O shepherd of Israel, thou that leadest Joseph like a flock, thou that dwellest between the cherubims, shine forth before Ephraim and Benjamin and Manasseh. Stir up thy strength and come and save us. Turn us again, O God, and cause thy face to shine, and we shall be saved. O Lord of hosts, O Lord God of hosts, how long wilt thou be angry against the prayer of thy people? Now, when you see that in verse 1, notice what we see there. He says, give ear, O shepherd of Israel, thou that leadest Joseph like a flock, thou that, what? Dwellest between the cherubims, shine forth. Now, where are the cherubims? On the ark, right? So, this is gonna be bad. So, we've got the ark here, right? And what you have, yeah. All right. So you got the two cherubim that are on top, and what he's talking about there. Where is that, by the way? It's in that innermost holy place, right? So what happens is, what does this verse say? Is Thou that what? Dwellest between the cherubim. So when they're dealing with the glory of God, that's what they're dealing with, right? Now, when we take a look at that, what is it that his glory is his presence, right? So then when we talk about this, I know you can't see most of that, but you're dealing with his presence, right? And if we could go back and take a look at some passages in Exodus and all that stuff, but what I want us to be able to think about is, where is that Ark of the Covenant? It's in that innermost holy place, right? So you've got the outer court, the inner court, and then you've got the what we would normally call the Holy of Holies or the holiest of place, But that's where that's what's behind the veil, right? So then, what I want us to do is kind of remind ourselves. Go back over to Matthew 23, and of course we talked about this before, but Matthew chapter 23. Hopefully you remember this. I know it's been quite some time, but I want you to think about these things in this term. In Matthew chapter 23, if you remember, starting off in verse 8, you've got Christ is talking to the Pharisees, or verse 13. Chapter 23, verse 13, starting in verse 13, what you have is Christ starts laying out all these woes, right? And what he's doing is he's figuratively taking them out behind the woodshed and showing them here's where they've messed up, right? When you look at, for instance, verse 23 says, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought ye to have done, and not to leave the other undone." And so when you see that, what he's doing, what were they supposed to do? Is they were supposed to be the ones making the judgments and all that stuff. And he says, all you're looking for is paying the tithe of the mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, the judgment, the mercy, and faith. They put all those things off to the side, and they're doing all this. And he says, "Ye blind guides, which strain at a gnat and swallow a camel." I mean, it's not good. He's not being nice with them, right? "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you make clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within they're full of exhortation and excess. Thou blind Pharisee, cleanse first that which is within the cup and platter, that the outside of them may be clean also." And he continues on down through there. Now, if you drop down to verse 33. Verse 33, he says, "Ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send unto you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them ye shall kill and crucify, and some of them shall ye scourge in your synagogues and persecute them from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom ye slew between the temple and the altar. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets, and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her children under her wings, and what? Ye would not." So he's saying, I've come to do what? Notice he says, "How often would I have gathered thy children together?" One of the reasons that I came was to gather you all together, but you chose not to. Right? Now, there's a whole bunch of things with when you start talking about the sovereignty of God. What's Christ's will there? Is that he would gather them all up like a hen. What's their will? Not to be. So is Christ's will overpowering their will to the point that they can't make a decision? Is it Christ's will that makes them choose not to be? No. So that's one of those passages you can take a look at and see that. Now, notice verse 38. And again, we've talked about this before. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. Now, if you remember, when we've gone through this before, hold your place there. Go back to chapter 21. Remember where we are. And in Matthew chapter 21, what we see in verse 12, and Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out all of them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves. And he said unto them, It is written, My house shall be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. Now, other passages we see it's the house of God. But here he says what? It is written, My house shall be called the house of prayer. Whose house is it? It's God's house. When we get over here to Matthew 24, what's he say in verse 38? Behold, your house is left desolate. Huh?
No, like God's saying, it's not my house anymore. I'm gone.
Yeah. And so then what happens is we see this in verse 38, Matthew 24:38. Christ goes in and says, My house shall be a house of prayer, but you've made it a house of den and thieves. When we get over here at the end of this point, because Christ we know is going to be crucified soon, because that's where we are now. But here in verse 39 of chapter 24, he says, Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. For I say unto you, ye shall not see me henceforth, till you shall say, Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. When he's what time period is he talking about in verse 39 is when he comes back. All right? It's a second coming passage. He's saying, Your house is left unto you desolate, and you're not going to see me anymore until I come back. Chapter 24, verse 1. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple. Now, what's interesting about that is, what is it that we see there when Christ leaves? What leaves? The presence. Right? And we talked about that and we'd gone through that. Now, back over here in Matthew chapter 27, what we see here in Matthew chapter 27, verse 51, And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. Now, were they able to see, and this kind of reminds me of I don't know why I just lost the words. Dorothy, Kansas, tornado, Wizard of Oz. Thank you. Golly Moses, I'm 49 one day and I've lost all my brain cells. Anyway, so Wizard of Oz, right? The veil's up. Did the people know about the presence of God left? So Matthew 24, Christ leaves. Do the people know at that moment, from that point to this point, you got the veil in front of it. And so then when we think about these things, are the charlatans still able to operate as if the presence was there? When we see this here in Matthew 27, verse 51, when the veil of the temple is rent in twain, what is put on display for every person is what? They can see that the presence is gone.
The man behind the curtain.
So you got the man behind the curtain, right? He's putting on this show like I'm something spectacular, but it's just this old guy in the back. So it's the same thing. They're putting on this show like, God's still here and we're going to keep doing the business and all that. And that's been from the time that he left the temple there. And we've talked about that a little bit, but I wanted us to be able to see that. So it's like this smoke and mirrors type show, that it looks like business as usual, but what is it that everybody is now privy to that they can no longer hide is it's a shams what they've been doing. Because that's when he's woe unto you, hypocrites, everybody else is now seeing that that's who they are.
But they've never been back there before, so they didn't know what it looked like.
But here's the thing. That's the point, because all they got to do is they go back and forth and they're saying, well, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing back there. We promise. Right? You brought lambs in. We did what we're supposed to do. Trust us.
So then they weren't doing those things?
Well, the idea of a lot of those, when you take a look at the tables of the money changers, is the idea that a lot of times when you've seen that, is what they're doing is they're selling animals to be part of their sacrifice, but then they're not actually sacrificing them. They're just doing it to make the buck and pocket of the money, or charge an extra, whatever it may be. But what they're doing, the whole system is messed up.
And that was, I'm sorry.
That's proof positive that you're fine. When the veil is torn in two, and they see this,
So
the
that's
people
going
are
on
proof
prior
positive.
to the veil being rent in twain. They
Yes.
were not doing those things.
They've made his house a house of thieves.
How long do you think they've been doing that?
Well, they've been doing it for a long period of time. But when Christ is there and he leaves the temple, that's a picture of the glory of God leaving. You go back in the Old Testament, you can actually see they've done it back then, but they didn't know it. But here's a picture of when Christ leaves, because you go back to Isaiah and some other passages, and you see that the sacrifices and things that the religious people are doing, they were a stench in the nostrils of God, because they're not doing it the way that God wanted them to do it. They're just going through the motions, doing the thing to make it look like everything's fine. You got 400 years period of silence, at least from God, from Malachi until John the Baptist shows up, that we can see. Of course, it's really Chronicles to when John the Baptist shows up. So there's 400-year period of silence. And what is it that the religious leaders are doing? Everything's fine. And, you know,
Hardworking people who's given the best of what they've got.
yeah.
And for nothing.
Yeah, and that's the point. And so that's why they're so far gone. When Christ shows up and he calls out the 12, right? And when we first started dealing with that, one of the things that we noticed there is he says, you all are like shepherds or sheep without a shepherd, because they were. Because the religious system, they've been a mess for hundreds of years.
It reminds me of those evil people on like TBN who try to take all these
Yeah.
the money from these
It's the Kenneth Copelands. It's the Kenneth Copelands. It's the Jesse Duplantis. It's the Joel Osteen. It's all those. It's all that stuff. That's what it is. What's his name? Stephen Furtick. Like, you've got all new guys doing the same stuff.
doing the same stuff.
Greg Locke. Like, all these things, all these people. You know, have you seen like all the stuff with Bethel Music and all the problems with them? It's the same stuff that's been going on back here. And every one of them's made the house of God a den of thieves rather than what it's supposed to be. And you don't know that that's what's going on until something's taken away and you're like, wait a minute, that's not what we thought it was. That's not what we thought we were partnering with.
And it's almost like what dispensation does to people. It removes this veil.
In a way, yeah.
That they've been bonded
And you know, we've talked about that. What is it? You know, Satan, the way Satan works, it's not new. I mean, you know, how is it that he worked in the Old Testament? It's the same way he's working now. It's the goal that he has is to keep people from hearing the gospel. So all I've got to do is just put out a false gospel, and then people are going to think that this is the right gospel, and then they're going to think that they're saved, and they're not. Well, if somebody does hear the gospel, all I've got to do now is, well, okay, you've gotten saved, but I'm going to prevent you from knowing who you are, and I'm going to hide the information of what God's doing dispensationally. And he puts out religious people, and it's not him, being a puppeteer type thing, running stuff. It's that system is there, and that system that we see in churches today is this. It's the same people. The problem is the veil's still up, if you will, on those ministries or for the people. And when you see right division, all of a sudden you start looking at that stuff and you're like, I know that that's fake. But before you don't. And then you get fighting mad when somebody comes along and says it is fake. Right? But it's the same stuff. It's the same thing, right? That false religious system that was set in motion in Genesis chapter 3 is still here today. And I'm going to make you think that you're saved because you go to church and you've done this and you give money, blah, 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 whatever it is. You walked an aisle, said a prayer, whatever it is. I'm going to make you think that you're doing something, that you've got something when you don't have anything. And that's what that religious system is going to do. These people, for 400 some odd years, they're all going and they're doing the tithes, they're doing the stuff, they're taking the sacrifices, and God's not pleased with any of it because the religious leaders are so far gone. And you get in this situation here, and you've got this idea that you have that system that you have to go through, and the people have corrupted the system, right? And then you take a look at those things, and as you go through here, that's one of the things that we'll see, and it's interesting because the timing of it, when it takes place, is when Christ gives up the ghost, then that takes place, right? Verse 51, Matthew 27:51. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. So not only do you have this issue of the veil being torn in two, but also you have an earthquake, and when it talks about rocks being rent, it's just the same as the veils of the temple being rent, the veil of the temple being rent. It's cut up, destroyed, broken, right? And what's interesting is you keep on going, verse 52, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose. So you have all this stuff taking place after he yields up the ghost. Could you imagine being there? I mean, you see an earthquake. Obviously, it's been dark for 3 hours in the middle of the day. Then he gives up the ghost. You have the veil rent in twain. You have an earthquake. Rocks are being broken.
But when the veil was torn, I bet made a big sound.
Well, I'm sure it would have.
Ripping sound.
And you got graves opening up. And then you see verse 52, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose. Huh?
Yeah.
Zombie apocalypse. But I mean, you think about this. The things that took place right then. You've got to think that one of those three men on the cross up there was pretty special.
Yeah.
And you knew they knew which one it was because they knew what they did, right? But I mean, you think about those things. Verse 53, and came out of the graves after his resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared unto many. I mean, you think about all this.
Okay, wait, I have a question
I know what it is, but go ahead.
after.
Yep,
resurrection.
after his resurrection.
That was 3 days later.
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways to take that. Yeah. Huh?
What was the rest?
What was her question?
Well, the question is,
You answered.
that took 3 days.
Well, I knew what you were going to say about after his resurrection there. So there's a couple different ways to take that, but if you think of if it's time wise after his resurrection, that would have been 3 days later. And again, we've talked about nothing through here in Matthew's chronological for the most part, right? We've talked about that. So either it's after his resurrection that it took after his resurrection and then they did that, or it's in the same manner of his resurrection that they rose.
But there can't be resurrection. Like, nobody had.
Somebody had been. Yeah. And the interesting thing too is it's many bodies of the saints which slept arose. Yeah. So you've had resurrection prior to this. I mean, even we talked about with Abraham taking Isaac up to the mountain. Abraham knew that God would be able to raise Isaac from the dead, right? So we know that that's a thing. But
What's your opinion?
well, the way that I look at this, huh?
There's the question.
Yeah. So the way I would look at this is, and came up out of the graves after his resurrection, I wouldn't think that this is 3 days later, because all of this is taking place because you see the graves were open and many bodies of the saints which slept arose and came out of the graves after his resurrection.
So what are you saying?
That they rose from the dead.
But not after.
I don't think it's timing after the resurrection of Jesus Christ, because all this stuff is
what you're saying.
in like manner.
But he hadn't risen.
He hasn't. But
So how can it refer to after his resurrection when he hadn't risen yet?
how is it that he raises from the dead? Okay. Something in here is rocking and it's driving me crazy.
How is it?
How is it that he's raised from the dead? Now, obviously, his resurrection is going to be completely different. But when you think about how is it that they rose from the dead, they're in their graves and they come up out of the grave, right? And so then what is it that they do? They went into the holy city and appeared unto many. When he raises from the dead, what happens? He appears, and he appears to the disciples. Now, here you've got people that are what? They're up and walking around, right? When you look at this, just the issue there that you see is I wouldn't see this as after time-wise, but more so the manner in which it was, that they're raised from the dead supernaturally.
That doesn't make sense to me because it would be comparing to something that hasn't happened yet.
But it has by the time Matthew had written this. The resurrection of Christ had taken place by the time this was written by Matthew. So he's referring to an event that's already taken place, but he's writing it as if it's not taken place yet. So he's writing it in retrospect, if you will. He's writing on the other side of Christ's resurrection. Does that kind of make sense? So like today,
So there's still a timing issue.
there's still a timing issue, but this stuff's all taking place. Hit the veil being rent in twain, the earthquake, the rocks rent, graves open, bodies of the saint which slept arose. They came out of their graves. They went into the holy city and appeared unto many. All that stuff, because verse 54 says, now when the centurion and they that were with him, watching Jesus, saw the earthquake and those things that were done, Well, what were the things that were done? The veil was rent in twain, the rocks rent, graves open, and the people were raised up, and they walked into the city and were seen by people.
What's the significance of them being raised from the dead? Sorry.
No, you're fine. What's one of the things, you think about the difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Part of the religious people that are here are Sadducees. The Sadducees don't believe in resurrection, so what do you have right before your eyes? When Jesus Christ is crucified, the moment he gives up the ghost, this takes place, what is it that they see? Resurrection. And you can't deny it. Now, one of the things that I would say with this is, you notice where he says, verse 52, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose. He doesn't say all the bodies of the saints that slept. So like Old Testament saints and folks like that, this would be some cut off, I don't know where. But you have many of the bodies of the saints that which slept arose. How many that would be, I'm not sure. If there's 5, don't you think you'd make mention of that? We got to pay attention to this. Some event just took place that we got to pay attention to. And so that's why you see verse 54, now when the centurion and they that were with him, watching Jesus, saw the earthquake and those things which were done, they feared greatly, saying, truly this was the Son of God. Their conclusion, his conclusion, and the ones with them, because it says they feared greatly, saying, what they noticed here is what? Not only is something fantastic just taking place, but what? The one who said he was the Son of God truly is the Son of God. Right? And it's interesting because you've got the centurion here who's a Gentile, and then you've got other Gentiles that are with him, and they're all thinking the same thing, that this truly is the Son of God. And here you've got a Gentile or Gentiles expressing faith in what God's done, and Israel's still blind.
So we know the significance of the veil being written twice.
Mm-hmm.
The explanation of the graves,
Mm-hmm.
resurrection. What do you think the significance of the earthquake and the rocks breaking is?
I think that's what was used to break it up. Yeah.
And shake up the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
But I mean, you think about this. Who holds the earth? It's by God's word that it's there. We can go to the passages later on. He's going to shake the earth. Like it's something that he has control over his creation.
Those are very specific things that happen.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, for those things. It's a very fantastical event that has just taken place.
Yeah.
You know.
And you think about that, you go through those things, you as you're looking at this, the thing that jumps out to me is you've got at least one Gentile, if not more, that are expressing the faith that the nation of Israel failed to do. Because what is it that, I mean, they mocked him by putting across the cross, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews.
I have
Right.
in mind that they probably had a pretty good feeling about what they did when this happened.
Oh, without a
They
doubt.
probably didn't verbalize that.
And they probably still finding a way to be able to explain it away.
Yeah.
But I mean, here you've got centurion guards that are there. And what's interesting to me is when you go back up, remember in the other passages that we'd gone through, who is it that shows up with the sponge and the vinegar to me, when you see that and it says, verse 54, now when the centurion and they that were with him, it was a centurion that took it up there. Right? If you remember, we went through all that stuff.
What do you think happened to all the other bodies that resurrected?
Well, they would have had to have died again, just like Lazarus did, right? Because you had the Lazarus resurrection, and what's interesting about that is, you think about when Christ goes there and he says, "Lazarus, come forth." Had he just said, "Come forth," I think all of this stuff would have taken place.
Had to be very specific.
But he was very specific. Lazarus, come forth. Here, this is a whole new thing. And again, what they should recognize is what happened with Lazarus and what's taking place here. Yeah.
I remember hearing someone talking about the Lazarus resurrection, like most people who weren't rich, they didn't have their own particular tomb or grave. So like Lazarus could have been in a communal or family
Mhm.
tomb. So there were multiple people in there with him. So that's why what he said specific to Lazarus.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you got, huh? Oh,
And there's that comedian who keeps in this skit about Lazarus, talking about Lazarus being in heaven.
Oh.
Like he's fixing up his mansion, and somebody comes in and is like, Lazarus, here's the deal.
yeah.
They need you to go back.
Yeah. Go over to Luke 23. Yeah. Could you imagine being Lazarus?
I'd like, no, I don't want to go back. I was going to say that's a buzz.
But I mean, you think about those things, and that was a miraculous resurrection that took place. He died again, right? Physically. You would have the same thing that would have taken place with these people here that rose up, went into the city, walked around, people saw them. They would have had to have died physically as well.
It's just interesting because you hear about him coming back out of the grave, but that's kind of it,
Yeah. And a lot of people don't mention that stuff. But I mean, you look at it like it's showing Israel that something amazing is just taking place. Look here at chapter 23, Luke 23, verse 46. We'll start at verse 46. He says, "And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said thus, he gave up the ghost. Now when the centurion saw what was done, he glorified God." Now, I want you to think about that for a second. How is it that he glorified God? Notice, saying. Now, stop and think about that for a second. How is it that the centurion glorifies God is what? Saying, certainly this was a righteous man. What is it that the scriptures teach us about Jesus Christ? He's a righteous man. What we saw over there in Matthew 27, he says what? This truly was the Son of God. What's the scripture tell us about Jesus Christ? That truly was the Son of God. What is this guy, how is he glorifying God? Is he saying, I agree with what the verses say about this man? And God's glorified by that. What's that whole religious system done is they've not glorified God because they're going about doing their things, trying to establish their own righteousness, do all that stuff. Here you've got a centurion, again, as I mentioned before, on the faith that Israel should have. Notice, verse 47, "Now when the centurion saw what was done, he glorified God, saying, Certainly this was a righteous man. And all the people that came together to that sight, beholding the things which were done, smote their breasts and returned. And all his acquaintance and the women that followed him from Galilee stood afar off, beholding these things." So again, what you see there in the account that Luke gives us, what is it that we find out about this centurion man is he's expressing faith in God's word. And what happens is God's glorified by that. Now, and I think that's another one of those things, like, we don't spend a lot of time, I guess, enunciating, if you will, or spending much time on it, but how is it that you glorify God? by trusting in his word and agreeing with what it says. Back over in Matthew 27, we saw the ladies over there, the women that were there as well. Matthew chapter 27, verse 55, and many women were there beholding afar off, which followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering unto him. So what's interesting is, what do you have here is you've got women who's followed Jesus from Galilee. Now, if you remember, he went up to Galilee, and then he comes back down here, and they're doing the things they're doing here. So they've been with him for a little bit, right? They're far off. They're watching and seeing what's going on, ministering unto him as they've gone through. Verse 56, among which were Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's children. What's interesting here is, here you've got, it would be a picture, if you will, of the daughters of Jerusalem. It would be a picture of that righteous nation, those that are standing afar off and they notice exactly what's taking place. Yeah.
Is Joseph strong?
Huh? I think it is, yeah. But I mean, you take a look at those things, and you'll see that there's no way it's 8:01. No, you're fine. No, it's fine. This morning I got 25 minutes to talk, and I'm like, I'm not used to this.
Ugh,
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I went over time, but
what did you do?
I went over time. I had to. Huh?
Minutes.
Yeah, not that bad, but I mean, you see there, and there's some things that we could go through with that. 2 Kings 19:21, Isaiah 13:22, Jeremiah 14:17, Lamentations 31, verse 15, and some other passages that get into that righteous nation. Here you've got two different groups of people, a small remnant. They're watching afar off, and they're seeing all this stuff taking place. But then here you've got all the religious leaders and all those folks there. They're standing there casting lots for his clothes and mocking him and doing all that stuff. Now, verses 57 through the end of the chapters, where we start getting in with the entombment of Christ and the sepulcher being sealed and guarded. And then people setting up watches to keep track of all those things. So, just because of time's sake, I don't want to start that last section or so.